You're right. We're talking here today about innovation being the essence of a changing world. We start right at the beginning by trying to have a common understanding of the word innovation. I bet if I asked 20 of you in the audience what you understood by the word innovation, we'd probably get 20 different kind of definitions. And if we took a step further and asked 20 more of you how you could make innovation happen, I'm sure we'll get 20 more variations on how innovation could really happen. And this time around, your answers would be accompanied by quizzical looks and expressions and the rest of that as you struggle to explain how innovation really happens. So we'll start by having a common and an easy understanding of innovation, my understanding of innovation, so that the rest of the talk falls into perspective. So we all know that customers buy products and services to be able to get a job done better. So innovation in that sense can be defined as the process that is devised to be able to develop a better product or a service concept that is going to allow the customer to get a job done better or to be able to get jobs done better. So therefore, innovation can either be driven through ideas. So there could be an idea-first approach to innovation, or you could have a need-first approach to innovation. The ideas-first approach to innovation is immensely popular. It allows everyone to participate. It allows for a great deal of involvement, but it's oftentimes a wasteful process of being able to innovate, especially when you do not have focused identification of customer needs. So if you don't have the identification of needs ahead of being able to generate ideas, then there is a struggle to be able to convert those ideas into workable solutions that are actually going to be able to give the organization a differentiated advantage or a competitive edge in the market. The needs-first approach to innovation also has its own challenges and is oftentimes seen to be ineffective in organizations, especially where there's a struggle to be able to identify what indeed are these needs that the organization is trying to address. Sometimes there is a confusion in terms of being able to prioritize the needs that the organization prefers to want to work on, and therefore the needs-first approach is also oftentimes a challenge in terms of being able to drive innovation. If you look at the ideas-first approach, I have an example there, which is essentially the DLF IPL is a good example of an ideas-first process of innovation. So ideas-first process of innovation fructified, and needs-first approach to innovation. The good example there is essentially the nano car. There is another very popular process of innovation, which is the outcome-driven process of innovation, which is kind of a happy combination of both. It starts with needs identification, but is essentially a more structured approach of generating ideas around a customer need so that it can generate value and a competitive edge for the organization. Which brings us to the question on why is this an imperative in changing times? Why is innovation an imperative in changing times? If you look at the changing economy, quality of products and services, customer service, continues to be important. But if there is one organizational challenge that has crept up upon organizations and oftentimes found organizations to be too flat-footed to be able to respond in an agile enough manner, it is the paramount challenge of innovation. In fact, corporate history is replete with examples of organizations that did not reinvent, did not innovate early enough, and thereby fell by the wayside. If you took the example of the typewriter industry, for instance, a very common and possibly stereotyped example, or the carbon paper manufacturing industry, these are common examples of industries that did not innovate or did not reinvent themselves early enough and fell by the wayside. In the more recent years, we often wonder about the telecommunication industry, especially as internet begins to take over as a preferred carrier of voice traffic. And therefore, there are 2 points that stare at us as we look at the changing world, and the world that's changing at a very, very accelerated pace, which is this changing world is unforgiving to organizations that are not able to be agile enough to be able to reinvent and change, if they're not able to innovate early enough in the game. So therefore, innovation is not a choice, it is an imperative of the times that we exist in. The second part being that this change that we're actually referring to or talking about ought to be led by senior managers, leaders inside the organization who have an expressed intent to want to drive innovation and change inside organizations. And what I mean by that is that they're able to put their money where their mouth is by being able to commit their performance bonuses maybe or their rewards for being able to enable the organization to survive in the long run rather than being focused on myopic deliveries for the current year's business plan. Which really brings me to organizations which oftentimes have senior managers commit innovation as the key performance indicator for their performance years. Which brings me to the larger part of the theme that we're discussing here today. Human resources processes can play a key role in being able to foster a culture of innovation. So when you talk about performance management, it's not the only area that can actually be able to drive innovation by being able to manage rewards and recognition inside the organization, but organization design can drive innovation, the way in which the quality of people or talent that's hired inside the organization can drive innovation, the way in which training and development is conducted inside the organization can drive a culture and foster a culture of innovation. The way in which rewards and recognition programs are designed inside organizations can actually define and foster a culture of innovation. So therefore, the culture of innovation, a culture that is mistake tolerant, a culture that is risk tolerant, is key to be able to foster innovation inside an organization. Which actually brings me to the moot point of what I wanted to share here with this audience today, which is if you look closely at innovation, innovation and learning are in fact two sides of the same coin. And the reason that I'm saying this is because I want you to dwell on this idea for a moment. When we talk about learning, what are we actually talking about? We're talking about, when we say learning, when we say somebody learns, what they actually do is that they integrate new ideas, new solutions, a better way, a more innovative way to their practice or their worldview. I'm going to repeat that. When we talk about learning, what actually happens is that the individual integrates a better solution, a better idea, a better way into his practice or into his worldview. And when organizations change, people who have learned influence processes and systems to adapt in line with their learning. And therefore, innovation is the essence of learning. If there is no learning, there is no innovation. And therefore, they are two sides, very much the two sides of the same coin. In fact, failure is the door to learning. Failure is the door to real learning. Unless there is an appetite to be able to reflect on one's failures and internalize lessons learned, there is no real innovation and no real learning. Which actually brings me back to how do we actually foster a macro culture of innovation. Given the way we are poised here in India today, there couldn't be a group of people who can talk about changing times better than we can, especially given the kind of changes we've experienced here in the past 10 years. And if we reflect on the way in which we raise our children, whether it comes to parenting, the way in which we raise adults through our education system, the way in which we load our expectations and groom professionals in organizations, there is an overemphasis, an unhealthy overemphasis on alignment, on getting things done the right way, and in fact leading people to believe that there is indeed one right answer to a question. And therefore, if we want to foster a culture of innovation, what is key is to revisit the way in which we are raising our children, the way in which we're managing our education system, and what we are expecting in the name of performance from people who actually work within organizations. There has to, and there is a need and a compelling need to be able to foster innovation by being able to create mistake-friendly or environments which are mistake-tolerant. There is such a deep sense of shame and embarrassment associated with making mistakes that oftentimes in organizations we are up against experiences where learning is completely blockaded because the individual does not want to accept a mistake, does not want to accept failure. And therefore, it is inherent and it is absolutely imperative to be able to foster a culture that is mistake tolerant, where failure is all right, it's okay to fail. Failure is only going to lead to more success, that unless we acknowledge that we failed, we're not going to be able to internalize lessons learned, and that it's only when we acknowledge failure are we going to be able to lead ourselves to a better solution, to a better answer, and most importantly, to a better world. In fact, there are great examples in organizations such as 3M. And I'm going to flip over to be able to bring you to the slide that talks about 3M. Great examples from organizations which have actually fostered a culture where failure is celebrated, where failure is revisited. There's a great example here of an innovation, of an idea that was brought forth in the form of sandpaper. Sandpaper being a possible replacement for a blade. It was a failed idea, did not take off, failed idea of innovation, which was revisited a couple of years later, where the same product was reintroduced in the market and used for the purpose of polishing car paint. It was a great success when it came back again. And I think this speaks volumes for the kind of culture the organization been able to foster, that did not put away or stack away its failures, but allowed the organization to be able to relook at failure and convert it into great success. In fact, there are enough and more examples of organizations that have been celebrating failure by being able to give out awards for risk-taking to their employees. Enough and more examples of organizations such as, I'm going to move on to Lockheed Martin, where failure is openly discussed with employees. And I think it's imperative to be able to drive this change in mental model towards mistakes and failure, where people who are in authority, whether be it parents, whether be it teachers, whether be it supervisors, whether be it managers, whether be it CEOs, actually spend time talking about their failures. It is imperative that we talk about our failures. We have far too many occasions and platforms where only success stories are discussed and celebrated. I think the starting point to innovation and new idea and breakthrough ideas is when we are able to accept mistakes and foster a culture of risk-taking, foster a culture of entrepreneurship, foster a culture of experimentation. And that can only happen if there is an inherent value that allows a macro culture that allows a tolerance for mistakes and failure. So this is a great example of an organization where the CEO spends time with the employees, gets into huddles with them and shares with them his personal failure stories. And what they have found happening as a result of him spending this time talking about his failures is that it's got the employees to unshackle their mind, not have shame and embarrassment associated with failure, come out with ideas, come out with breakthrough ideas, make suggestions, not be embarrassed about making mistakes, which has led the organization to foster a culture of great innovation. I don't know how many of you have heard about the Razzies. These are the Raspberry Awards. They're essentially the flip side of the Oscars or the Academy Awards. And I think this, again, is a great example of celebration of failure. These are essentially awards given out to the worst film, to the worst performers, to the worst actor, to the worst actress, to the worst director. And I think is a great example of developing a great sense of humor with regards to failure. In fact, there is a great example here of Sandra Bullock, and I think it kind of drives home my point completely. Sandra Bullock in the year 2009 picking up both the Razzies and the Academy Awards in the same year. Yeah, so she won the Razzies for All About Steve and the Oscar for The Blind Side. And both in the same year, celebrating both success and failure in the same year. Success being a milestone, failure being an opportunity for fresh insights, new ideas, going back to the drawing board and internalizing lessons learned. And therefore, developing a macro culture, a macro environment that is mistake tolerant. Starting right from the way in which we are grooming our children, right from the way in which we're instilling values in our students as they're going through their academic careers, and what we're expecting people to come into organizations and do, all require a huge orientation to accept failure as a stepping stone to great ideas and breakthrough innovation. I'm going to try and end this talk by being able to drive 3 points. One is that mistake tolerance is associated with innovation. And the reason I say this is because if there is no tolerance for mistakes, if there is no tolerance for failure, then one cannot expect breakthrough ideas and innovation. Because the human mind is too shackled with fear to be able to come out with any worthwhile ideas or suggestions. Two, we need to instill in our macro culture 2 integral values. One, inherent tolerance for failure, and seeing failure as an ongoing journey that leads to great success. 2, an undying faith in the value of human potential to be able to deliver great ideas, to be able to deliver breakthrough ideas. So unless there is a great belief in the power of human potential, one cannot expect great ideas and innovation. And 3, if we do want to become a country of innovators, we got to start right at the start, which is to be able to build a spirit and a sense of acceptance when it comes to failure. So I'm going to end by wishing you all in the audience the very best in terms of your own journeys of excellence, your own journeys of innovation, and I'm going to wish you a great display of a high spirit that allows you to accept and embrace failure, because it's something that comes along the way as you lead yourself to great success and innovation. So fail early, fail often, fail forward. Thank you.